The Spaniards enter the capital of the Mexica world, Tenochtitlan, a city of towers, palaces, and markets greater than anything seen in Europe at the time. They are welcomed by Moctezuma, the great speaker, supreme ruler of this empire of millions. He greets Hernán with gifts, gold, and ceremony, a gesture of power and of trust. But this trust will not be his greatest mistake. What moment would turn welcome into ruin and power into collapse?
They entered deeper into the city, moving along broad stone-paved streets. Houses of lime and stone lined the roads, some with upper stories and gardens. Bridges crossed canals, where canoes glided past carrying goods and passengers. The streets were crowded with people going about their daily work. Men carried bundles of firewood, women prepared food to sell, and children fetched water in clay jars. The variety of dress revealed differences in class: nobles in feathered cloaks, commoners in simpler cotton garments. They soon approached one of the great markets. It stretched wide and orderly, filled with thousands of merchants. Bernal Diaz later wrote that no market in Spain matched its size or organization. Goods of every kind were exchanged: food, clothing, tools, and luxury items. Cacao beans were counted out for trade. Scales weighed gold dust and precious stones. Canals cut through parts of the marketplace, and canoes delivered goods directly to the stalls. This blending of land and water transport astonished the newcomers. Beyond the markets rose the ceremonial district. Temples, shrines, and platforms crowded the skyline. Priests moved in their white robes, carrying braziers of incense. Smoke drifted upward, filling the air with the scent of copal. Further along, they saw palaces of lime and stone. Some had upper stories, wide courtyards, and gardens filled with birds and flowers. Nobles and attendants moved in and out, while guards stood watch. Murals adorned the walls, depicting gods, warriors, and rulers. Carved stone figures stood at entrances, marking the importance of the spaces within. They approached the great ceremonial precinct. The Templo Mayor towered above all else, its twin shrines standing side by side at the summit. The pyramid was steep, its stone steps climbing high into the sky. At its base, priests and attendants moved constantly. Incense burned in clay vessels. Offerings of flowers and maize were placed on platforms. The smoke rose in heavy clouds, carrying the scent of copal across the city. Bernal Diaz and other chroniclers noted the solemn atmosphere, the sense of awe and devotion that surrounded the place. Warriors in ceremonial dress stood near the base of the temple, holding shields and spears, their bodies painted in patterns of red, black, and white. The Spaniards moved cautiously, their eyes fixed on the temple complex and the activity that surrounded it. They had never seen a place of worship so vast, so filled with color, sound, and movement. The drums echoed across the precinct, deep and rhythmic, while conch shells sounded from the platforms above. From there, the procession turned toward the palace of Moctezuma. The approach was deliberate and formal. Nobles walked ahead, clearing the way, and messengers hurried to announce the arrival of the newcomers. The courtyards leading to the palace were broad and paved, flanked by high walls. It was here that the Spaniards first saw the Huey Tlatoani himself, Moctezuma, the great speaker. He came out from within his palace surrounded by lords and attendants. He wore a cloak woven with turquoise and threaded with gold. On his head rested a headdress of quetzal feathers that shimmered in the light. Moctezuma was carried in a litter adorned with gold and precious stones. None dared look at him directly except the highest nobles. When he descended, the nobles laid down cloaks on the ground so his feet would not touch the earth. The Spaniards stopped. Cortés stepped forward, and in that moment, two worlds faced one another. On one side, the Huey Tlatoani of the Mexica, ruler of an empire of millions. On the other, a small band of strangers, armored and weary from months of travel, but determined and observant. The meeting was conducted in silence at first, broken only by the sound of drums and the murmur of attendants. Then words were exchanged through interpreters. Moctezuma welcomed them formally, and gifts were brought forward: collars of gold, decorated cloaks, and ornaments of feather and jade. The gifts were accepted with ceremony. The Spaniards bowed, while Moctezuma remained calm, his face controlled, his bearing composed. The first encounter had taken place. It was a moment that would decide the fate of the city, though none present could yet know how. After the formal audience, the Spaniards continued through the palace precinct, moving quietly along paved courtyards and shaded walkways. They observed attendants carrying vessels, arranging ceremonial instruments, and maintaining the gardens that adorned the courtyards. Every movement was precise, reflecting the highly organized structure of the court. Smaller temples and shrines dotted the precinct, each dedicated to different deities. Priests performed rituals at these sites, offering maize, flowers, and small carved figures, while apprentices and attendants assisted with careful attention. Smoke from incense drifted upward, filling the air with the scent of copal, and the rhythmic sound of drums and flutes accompanied the ceremonies. They noticed how nobles coordinated the flow of people and offerings, signaling actions with subtle gestures and ensuring that every ritual proceeded smoothly. Children moved among the attendants, carrying small offerings or helping with ceremonial items, learning the responsibilities that would one day fall to them. Throughout the precinct, the Spaniards saw evidence of wealth and refinement. Murals on the walls depicted gods, historical events, and mythological scenes, each conveying symbolic meaning. Gardens were meticulously maintained, with exotic birds in aviaries and flowering plants carefully arranged. Stone platforms and terraces organized the space, blending functionality with ceremonial significance. Even the canals that threaded the precinct were used with precision. Canoes delivered materials and goods for rituals, while warriors in ceremonial attire stood at key points, vigilant but unobtrusive. Every detail, the positioning of attendants, the rhythm of the ceremonies, the layout of the temples, reinforced the Spaniards' understanding of Tenochtitlan as a city of careful planning, discipline, and spiritual authority. They moved slowly, observing without interference, aware that each action, each gesture, and each object carried meaning. The palace precinct was not only the residence of the Tlatoani, but the center of governance, religious activity, and social organization, a microcosm of the empire itself. They were lodged in one of the great palaces of Tenochtitlan. The building was vast, with multiple halls, wide courtyards, and rooms enough for every Spaniard and their allies. Servants brought food, water, and bedding. Attendants swept the rooms and maintained the gardens. The newcomers had never experienced such hospitality in a foreign land. The meals astonished them. Hundreds of dishes were prepared each day: maize tamales, turkeys, fish from the lake, fruits, and cacao. Every Spaniard ate according to his needs, while nobles of the city oversaw the distribution of supplies. The abundance of food and the precision of its delivery gave a glimpse into the wealth and organization of the Mexica state. Each morning, Moctezuma sent gifts: clothing of cotton and featherwork, ornaments of gold, and delicacies from his own table. His generosity was calculated to demonstrate power as much as kindness. He addressed Cortés with formal respect, recognizing him as the leader of his band. Yet the Spaniards also noticed the watchfulness of their hosts. Guards remained near the palace gates. Priests continued their rituals in the nearby temples, the sound of drums carrying through the city. The newcomers were honored guests, but they were also being observed closely. Bernal Diaz later described the city's markets and temples in greater detail during these days. Thousands gathered daily in Tlatelolco to trade. The great temple towers rose high above the ceremonial district. From the Spaniards' quarters, they could see smoke rising from offerings and hear the music of conch shells and flutes. While the Spaniards marveled at what they saw, unease grew within their company. Some feared treachery. Others whispered about the sheer size of the city and the number of warriors it contained. They knew they were outnumbered many times over, and every sound from outside the palace reminded them of their precarious position. Cortés maintained calm. He ordered his men to remain disciplined, to keep their weapons ready, but not to provoke their hosts. He spoke with Montezuma through interpreters, asking questions about the empire, its provinces, and its rulers. Each answer gave him more knowledge, and with it, more ideas. For the Mexica, the days after the arrival of these strangers were marked by ritual. Priests offered sacrifices to the gods, nobles exchanged counsels with Moctezuma, and the people of the city brought news of the strange visitors to every marketplace. The presence of the Spaniards became part of the rhythm of the city itself, woven into its daily life, but with an air of tension that could not be ignored. The first days in Tenochtitlan passed like this: ceremonies, exchanges of gifts, questions and answers, and silent observation on both sides. Each side sought to understand the other, and neither fully revealed what lay behind their words and gestures. As the Spaniards settled in the city, Cortés noted that not all Mexica nobles were fully loyal to Moctezuma. Cortés observed closely, noting which nobles seemed ambitious or dissatisfied. Through gifts and careful conversation, he began forming connections that could prove useful later. The Spaniards remained aware of their precarious position. They were honored guests, yet surrounded by a city of hundreds of thousands. Cortés reinforced discipline, ensuring his men stayed observant and restrained. The Spaniards also noticed subtle signs of unrest. Certain nobles avoided eye contact, while some citizens whispered among themselves. Cortés recognized that not all in the city were fully aligned with Moctezuma, and he began quietly considering how to leverage these divisions. One morning, the Spaniards were escorted to a ceremonial courtyard where warriors demonstrated their formations and weapons. The display was precise and intimidating, a reminder of how powerful the city could be in defense. Cortés studied the formations, noting both strengths and potential vulnerabilities. As the day progressed, Cortés received another gift from Moctezuma, a finely crafted collar of gold and a ceremonial cloak adorned with feathers. The gesture reinforced the emperor's authority and generosity, yet Cortés could sense the tension behind the ceremony. Guards and attendants remained vigilant, observing the Spaniards' reactions carefully. That evening, Cortés gathered his captains. They discussed what they had learned, weighing the city's defenses, the loyalty of certain nobles, and the opportunities that might arise. It was clear that, while Tenochtitlan was majestic and disciplined, cracks existed in the social and political fabric. Cortés knew that the city was both magnificent and fragile, and that the next days could change everything. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. The stage was set for decisions and actions that would alter the fate of the Mexica Empire. Cortés knew that understanding the loyalty of the nobles was key. He began to cultivate alliances quietly, rewarding those who showed curiosity or ambition and noting those who seemed resistant. Through interpreters, Cortés asked questions about the collection of tribute, the movement of armies, and the administration of provinces. Some locals answered freely, while others spoke cautiously. Tension in the city was palpable. Guards and attendants followed the Spaniards closely, while citizens whispered in markets and along canals. Cortés reminded his men to stay disciplined, observing without provoking while also recording every useful detail. One afternoon, a delegation of nobles invited Cortés to a private courtyard. He listened carefully, noting rivalries and ambitions among the Mexica elite and beginning to understand how leverage could be applied without overt confrontation. Tension in the city was palpable. Guards and attendants followed the Spaniards closely, while citizens whispered in markets and along canals. Cortés reminded his men to stay disciplined, observing without provoking, while also recording every useful detail. By the end of the day, Cortés and his captains had pieced together valuable intelligence. They knew which nobles could be persuaded, which districts were strategically significant, and how the flow of resources and people could influence events. As night fell, the Spaniards looked out over Tenochtitlan. Fires burned across the city, drums echoed in the distance, and the lights of markets glimmered along the canals. The city was magnificent, disciplined, and wealthy, yet beneath the surface, Cortés sensed opportunity. Cortés quickly assessed the political landscape of Tenochtitlan. Certain nobles were openly ambitious, while others remained loyal to Moctezuma. Through carefully placed gifts and discreet conversations, he began consolidating a small network of allies. Cortés recognized that Montezuma's hospitality and generosity were carefully measured. Every gift, every ceremony, every attentive gesture was accompanied by vigilant observation. The emperor's courtiers and guards watched the Spaniards closely, and Cortés understood that the outward display of welcome was carefully layered with vigilant surveillance and guarded attention. Building on the alliances he had quietly established among ambitious nobles, Cortés requested a private audience with Moctezuma, framed as a gesture of diplomacy and respect. In the emperor's presence, he observed closely the subtle movements of attendants, the expressions of nearby nobles, the careful arrangement of guards. Using measured words, he probed the loyalty of the court, emphasizing divisions among the elite and hinting at the potential consequences should loyalty falter. He spoke politely, yet the weight of his questions and the presence of armed Spaniards nearby conveyed an unmistakable undercurrent of pressure. The tension in the palace was palpable. Montezuma's ceremonial authority remained intact, but the emperor's personal judgment and political power were now being tested directly. The stage was set. Cortés's strategic intelligence gathering, cultivated alliances, and careful positioning had transformed the Spaniards from mere guests into actors capable of influencing the balance of power. Every gesture, every whisper, every calculated move brought the Spaniards closer to the moment when decisive action would reshape the future of Tenochtitlan, and ultimately, the fate of the Mexica Empire. Cortés decided it was time to assert a more visible presence. He placed Spanish soldiers at strategic points around the palace and key causeways, ostensibly to assist with security, but in reality to control movement within the city. The emperor's courtiers and advisors noticed the increased Spanish activity. Some whispered their concern, others subtly approached Cortés's allies to understand his intentions. Tension spread through the palace, even as Moctezuma maintained his ceremonial composure. Cortés then met privately with several influential nobles who had shown ambition or discontent. He encouraged them to act as intermediaries, gathering intelligence and preparing to support Spanish moves when the time came. Every word, every gesture was carefully measured to avoid provoking outright resistance, yet clearly signaling a shift in power. Meanwhile, Cortés instructed his captains to observe the flow of the city, the movement of warriors, distribution of resources, and positioning of guards. He recorded which districts were loyal to the emperor and which might yield if persuaded or pressured. A ceremonial procession provided the next opportunity. Cortés positioned his men nearby, ensuring access to critical areas while watching the emperor's reactions. Moctezuma proceeded with ritual dignity, yet subtle signs betrayed unease. A hand on a guard's shoulder, a fleeting glance exchanged with a noble, a slight tightening of the formation. By acting through a combination of strategic placement, subtle alliances, and careful observation, Cortés had created a scenario in which he could influence decisions and control key parts of the city. The Spaniards were no longer passive guests. They were now active participants shaping the political and military environment. Every maneuver and subtle calculation edged the Spaniards closer to a decisive confrontation, a moment that would forever alter the balance of power in Tenochtitlan and seal the fate of the Mexica Empire.
The Spaniards had arrived as guests, but their presence had grown into something far more dangerous. Each step, Each alliance, each maneuver brought tension to the heart of Tenochtitlan. Nobles watched closely. Warriors tightened their formations. And Moctezuma himself began to feel the weight of eyes upon him. Cortés pressed further, his questions sharper, his movements more deliberate. A single decision would ignite events that no one, Spaniard or Mexica, could reverse. What followed would shatter the balance of power and set into motion the downfall of an empire.